Alright, so today we're going to solve rational equations. So once again, remember that this word rational means fraction. And because we are solving equations, these are actually going to have an equal sign this time. And we are trying to find what does x equal. So a little bit different than what we have been doing. We've just been like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing expressions, simplifying expressions. Today we're actually going to do some equations and find what x is. So here we go. Okay, so here's the first case. This is a fraction equaling a fraction. So notice that there is one fraction on the left side, there's one fraction on the right side. So whenever this happens, we are going to cross multiply and we're going to solve. So I've heard people say that this is like the butterfly method. I didn't really learn that, but if that's how you learned it and you know what that means, then that's cool. So we're just going to multiply these together. 7 times x is a 7x equal. And then we're going to cross multiply these two. So this is actually a 4. And then remember that we are multiplying that to the entire quantity x minus 6. So this is when you would actually have to distribute. So we got a 7x equals a 4 times an x is a 4x, and a 4 times a negative 6 is a negative 20. Okay, so we've cross multiplied, we've distributed anything that we can, and now we're just going to solve like we did back in the day when we were doing Math 1 problems. We need to move this positive 4x to the other side, so the way that we undo that is subtract it. Alright, so that's going to cancel out. A 7x minus 4x is just a 3x equal negative 24. We need to get rid of the 3 in front of the x. Remember, the 3 and the x are being multiplied, so the way we undo it is to divide. Alright, so that cancels out. So x equals a negative 24 divided by 3 is a negative 8. So that would be my final answer. Okay, so this is very similar, just gets a little more complicated. So we're going to cross multiply. So I'm going to multiply these two together, and remember that these two are two different quantities, so I'm going to put them in parentheses. And then I'm going to multiply these two together. So something like this. Okay. So on the left side of the equals, I have a binomial times a binomial. That's when you distribute, and you can distribute using the FOIL method if you like saying that. I hate it, but you know me. So 2x times x is a 2x squared. Now I'm going to do the outer. A 2x times a 4 is a 8x. I'm going to distribute the negative 3 now. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x, and I got to distribute the negative 3 to the 4. Negative 3 times 4 is a negative 12 equals 2 times 3 is 6. So if you'll notice, I have some like terms that I can get together. So I have 2x squared, and 8x minus a 3x is a 5x, and we have minus 12 equals 6. So if you'll notice, this is a quadratic. On the left side, we always want quadratics to equal 0. Right now it equals positive 6, so we are going to undo that positive 6 by subtracting. So I have a 2x squared plus 5x minus 18 equals 0. So that's what we want to happen. We want quadratics to always equal 0. I am going to clean this up a little bit, so give me just a second. Okay, so I just had to give myself some more room because the screen is a little bit small. Okay, so several ways to solve quadratics. You learned them in Math 1 and Math 2. You could solve by graphing or completing the square or quadratic formula. I'm just going to do factoring really quick. So I can't use the shortcut method because there's a 2 in front of x squared. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 2 times negative 18, which is negative 36. But those two numbers also have to add to give me the middle number 5. Those two numbers are 9 and negative 4. This is when I rewrite that middle term. Oh, not with a 5x, JK. With those two numbers that I just found. And then I'm going to group the first two and last two and take out GCF. So that first GCF is going to be an x. I'm left with 2x plus 9. The second GCF is a negative 2. I'm left with 2x plus 9. That means my two parentheses are going to be 2x plus 9 and x minus 2. So remember that we are solving these. I'm just going to do it up here. I'm going to take each of these quantities and set them equal to 0. Because remember, the whole point of this is to solve for x. So in the first one, I'm going to get rid of adding 9 by subtracting. And then I'm going to get rid of timesing by 2 by dividing. So my first answer is negative 9 over 2. And then in the second quantity, I need to get rid of minus 2 by adding. So x equals 2. So in this case, we have two different answers. We have x equals negative 9/2 and x equals 2. Alright, I'm going to pause this and I want you to try it in 1, 2, 3. Alright, so we're going to cross multiply. The two reds are going to be multiplied together and the two blues are multiplied together. So when I simplify, this is what I get. Notice that it's a quadratic. You always want quadratics to equal 0, so that's what I've done. And now I'm going to factor. This is how it factors. So now I'm going to set each of those quantities equal to 0 and solve. So I end up having two answers. X equals negative 6, and it also equals 5. So if you got that right, good job. If not, please try to find your mistake or email me and we'll talk about it, whatever we need to do. Okay, so here's the second case. So notice we have more than two fractions going on. So on the left side of the equals, we have two fractions being subtracted. On the right side, we have another fraction. So these are kind of, I think, the most difficult ones you can do. What we want to do is try to figure out what the least common denominator is. So I'm going to try to help you out. The first denominator, if you'll notice, is an x minus 1. The second fraction also has the x minus 1, and the third fraction has the x minus 1. So definitely when we talk about the least common denominator, we definitely want to include x minus 1. But then also we're looking at, is there anything else involved in the denominators that's not just x minus 1? So if you'll notice, in that second denominator, they also have an x. So there's two things that I need to include when I'm doing the least common denominator. I need to have x minus 1 and x. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that least common denominator on top of all the fractions. Okay, so the only thing I've done is I've rewritten the entire problem. I've added the x and the x minus 1 on the tops of the fractions. And that is because we are really multiplying each of those fractions by the least common denominator because we are trying to get the denominators to cancel out. So I want you to look at the very first fraction. Notice that it has an x minus 1 on top and an x minus 1 on bottom. Those can be canceled out. And so what's left in the first fraction is this x and this x plus 6. So I'm going to write them down here so you can know where I got this from. Okay, then look at the second fraction. They both have an x on top and an x minus 1 on top and bottom. So I'm going to cancel those out. And in yellow, I'm going to mark what's left. So notice this was a minus, parentheses, x minus 4. And then look at that last fraction. They both have x minus 1, so top and bottom. And I'm going to circle what's left. We got an x and a 1 left. And you know that x times 1 is just x. So what I've done is I have found the least common denominator. I have multiplied that to the tops of each of the fractions. And I have got the denominators to actually cancel out. And that's what I wanted to do to make this problem more manageable. So we should know what to do at this point, but in case you don't, I'm going to distribute that x to everything in the parentheses. This is like a negative 1. I'm going to distribute to everything in the parentheses. So after distributing, this is what I get. I'm also going to get everything on the left side of the equation and get everything, all like terms equal to each other. So at this point, I have a quadratic. I need to solve the quadratic by either factoring, quadratic method, just whatever you will. I'm going to just factor it really quickly. The two factors are going to be x minus 2 and x minus 2. And because they're the same, I don't need to do it twice. That's just kind of redundant. I'm going to set the quantity equal to 0, and I'm going to solve for x. So my answer is x equals 2. So email me if that did not make sense, and we'll talk about it some more. Okay, so same thing for this one. This one is the case 2 because we have more than one fraction going on. We need to find the least common denominator. So what I want you to think about is I'm going to factor the bottom completely, really quickly. Okay, so all I did was I rewrote that number 6 as 3 times 2. Because sometimes it helps to do this at the very beginning, but if you didn't see that, it's okay. So here's what I'm looking for. Notice that there's a 3 in this denominator, and there's also a 3 in this denominator, so definitely a 3 for my LCD. And now I'm looking at anything else that's included in the denominator that I missed. So there's an x in this one, so I definitely want an x in the denominator. And then the very last thing is there's also a 2, so I want a 2 in the denominator as well. Okay, I'm going to take that LCD that I just found, and I'm going to multiply it to the tops of all the fractions. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and rewrite it. Okay, so notice what I've done is I've taken the not the original problem, but the factored problem, and I've just multiplied a 2, and 3, and an x to each one. And so what I want you to do is look at the first fraction. It has a 3 on bottom, and it also has a 3 on top that I can cancel out. And then in yellow, I'm going to circle what's left. I got a 2, an x, and a 4. I'm just going to write what's left so we don't get confused. Look at the second fraction. It has an x on bottom, x on top, so I'm going to cancel that out. And then in yellow, I'm going to circle what's left. So minus 2 times 3 times 7. And then the very last one, same thing. I'm looking for what it has in common on top and bottom. They both have a 2 and a 3. I'm going to cancel those out, and I'm going to mark what's left. So equal. Alright, so I'm going to simplify this and clean it up a little bit. Alright, so this is what I have. 8x minus 42 equals x. We want to have the x's on the same side, so I'm going to move that 8x over. It's positive, so I have to subtract it. That's how I undo it. So now I have negative 42 equals x minus 8x is a negative 7x. And then I got to get rid of that negative 7 in front of the x. I got to divide it. And negative 42 divided by negative 7 is a positive 6. So my answer is x equals 6. Alright, so I want you to try this one. Before you begin, I want to make sure that you factor it completely so that you can figure out what the LCD is. And then notice that that second 2, it's not really a fraction, but you could think of it as being over 1. So I want you to hit the pause button, and then if you get stuck, you can hit play, and then try to figure it out as you go along. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. So the first thing you need to do is factor it completely. So now that I've factored it, I can see that I definitely need an x minus 2 as my LCD. LCD x minus 2. I don't really need to consider the 1 on the bottom of the 2. That's just kind of redundant. And then the only other thing that I haven't included is this x plus 2. So my LCD is going to be an x minus 2 and an x plus 2. So I'm going to put that on the top of all 3 fractions. Alright, and then we're going to start canceling stuff out. So x minus 2 can go away. There's nothing I can cancel out in the second one. And then both of these denominators. So remember, all denominators should cancel out in this step. I'm going to circle what's left. And I'm going to rewrite that really quickly. Okay, so it gets a little messy. So I'm going to have to distribute everything together, get like terms together. So for this one right here, remember you can only distribute 2 things at once. So be careful right there. Okay, so this is what you should get. I had to erase the problem just to have a little bit more room. And now I want you to get all like terms together. It needs to be equal to 0. Put everything on one side. So you have this quadratic, and now you need to either factor or quadratic formula or find where it hits the x-axis. Okay, and once you have it factored, you can set those quantities equal to 0 and solve. And I realize that some of you may just hate factoring, and it's perfectly fine to just use the quadratic formula. So there is one answer. The other answer is over here. Sorry, I'm just kind of running out of room. So I'm going to put a square around each answer. That is x equals -8/3 and x equals +2. And that's all, folks. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, email me, hit me up on the Remind app, DM me on social media, but not in a weird way, please. That's weird. Okay. I'll see you later.